And yesterday we talked about the legal name, legal form, address, and we have gone through formation document, maze code, nature of the business, source of funds, source of wealth, initial capital, director, signature, legal representative, right? So we're currently at ownership. So ownership continuation. Now, what exactly is ownership? For you to understand ownership, it's important that you understand the 6 rules to understanding a beneficiary owner that GMB has created. Now, there are 6 rules we would like you to have at the back of your mind before we get into the session on ownership. Rule number 1, always assume all entity is worth $100 or £100. Just assume it. So whenever we're talking about an entity or corporate entity or a customer, assume in the back of your mind that this is worth $100, right? Or £100. That will make it easier for you. Rule number 2, all entities have a beneficiary owners, right? And these beneficiary owners are individuals at the end of every ownership chain. So what this literally means is a company or an entity don't just own themselves. No matter the length of the chain of the ownership, there is always an individual at the back or at the end of the ownership chain that owns or controls that entity, right? Now, whether that individual is identified as a beneficiary owner or not, there is an individual, right? Now, rule number 3, where an individual is not identifiable, it can only be a government entity or a listing entity. Now, what this means is, if for some reason we then decided that, or we realize, or we then find out that, no individual is behind the entity that we're trying to understand who owns them, the only reason for you to stop drilling further is when you find out that a government owns it, because then you can't drill down the government because no one owns a government. So, for example, if there is company A is owned by company B and company B is owned by company C to Z, and then who owns Z? Company Z, and it's the UK government. There's no need to say who owns the UK government because no one owns the UK government. Does that make sense? Or if you then get to the end of your due diligence, then you realize that actually this entity is listed on London Stock Exchange. Although individual still owns them, but we rely on the fact that a recognized stock exchange, that entity is listed on a recognized stock exchange. Then we don't drill further. Yeah. Okay. Number 4, individual identified to own 25%, to own $25 or £25 or more of an entity are called a UBO. Now, what this means is, remember in rule number 1, we said I just assume that the entity is worth $100 or £100. Then if any individual, as part of your calculation, you realize that they own $25 of the $100 at the minimum, then you would identify them and call them a UBO. If they own less than $25, then they're just normal individuals, so you don't regard them as a UBO. Now, rule number 5, an individual who controls an entity via other means, e.g. through influence, will be known as a PSC. Now, what a PSC means is person of significant control. I would explain that in a minute. And rule number 6, individuals who owns or control less than 25% are just natural person. Like I said in rule number 4, if they own 25% or more, they're regarded as UBO. If they own less than 25%, they are just natural person, which if they own $25 in terms of a breakdown of currency. Yeah. Now, let's take this further. Now, rule number 1, we said assume every entity is worth $100. Now, if this entity is worth $100, it means that individual cannot own more than the $100 because that's the worth of it, right? You can own part of it. So owners will take a percentage, part, or all of the $100. An individual can own everything, or they own a part of the $100. Yeah. Now, there is something called an IBO. An IBO is a legal person. Now, when I say legal person, I mean an entity that directly or indirectly owns or control any part of the prospective or existing customer. Now, an IBO in most cases act like a link between the customer and the UBO. What does that mean? I'll explain in a minute. Now, let's go back to the same illustration. If we have a company A, for example, as our customer, and company A is owned by company B, and then company B in turn is owned by a natural person. What this means is this individual in the middle linking company A and where we need to stop the drilling down, because we can't drill down individual because no one owns an individual, is the IBO. There might be one IBO within an ownership chain. There might be 2, 10, 20, 40. It doesn't matter, as long as they are the link between where you started your due diligence with the customer and where you're looking to understand who owns them at the end of the chain. Any entity in between the start and the finish are identified as the IBOs. Yeah. Now let's take this a little bit further. Now, if company A is worth $100, right, and company A is owned by company B. Now, company B owns all of company A. My question to you on the call is, how much does it own? Yeah, anyone, please feel free to unmute yourself now. Now is the time we need to engage. So if company B owns all of company A, how much does company B owns?
$100.
$100. Does everyone agree?
Yes.
$100.
Absolutely. So it's $100. So now, if it is $100, then company B is owned by a natural person. A natural person owns all of company B. Now, how much does he own?
$100.
$100. Absolutely. Now, if company A is worth $100, like we already know, and is owned, and company B owns half of company A, how much does company B own?
$50.
$50. Absolutely. Now, if a natural person owns all of company B, how much does he own?
$150.
150, did you say?
No, $50.
Remember, the entity is worth $100. You can't own more than what the entity is worth.
$50.
Absolutely. $50. So if this entity is worth $100 and company B owns 25% of company A, how much does company B own?
$25.
Does everyone agree?
Yes.
Okay, yes, absolutely. Now, if natural person A or natural person owns all of company B, how much does it own?
$25.
Absolutely, $25. Now, say for example, company B owns 50% of company A. He owns $50, like we already initially identified. And if natural person owns 50% of company B, how much does he own?
$25.
25 quid, $25. Thank you. So if company A is what $100, and then company B owns 10% of company A, how much does company B own? Sorry, I just want to mute somebody. I think Ayo, Fajana, you're on mute. Just gonna mute you and feel free to unmute yourself at any point in time. Okay. Yeah. How much? $10. Absolutely. Now, what if natural person owns 25% of company B? How much does he own?
$2.50.
Sorry?
$2.50.
It's $2.50 what?
Pence.
Absolutely. Are you sure dollars uses pence?
Cents.
US people on the call.
I said cents.
Oh, okay, so okay. Now that we've kind of established that kind of foundation understanding, we're going to come back to it in a minute. So, who then is a UBO? Now, a UBO is a natural person who ultimately owns or controls the entity, which is the customer. Now, a UBO is always, bear in mind, always a natural person, not a legal entity. A UBO will be classified as anyone who owns 25% or more of an entity, which means anytime an individual is identified to own 25% of an entity, then we regard them as a UBO. Now, let's go back now and just try another one. Now, if we have a natural person that owns more than 25%, are they regarded as a UBO or not?
UBO, yes.
Absolutely, UBO. Yep. Now, if the other guys own more than 25, they also identify as a UBO. Now, even individual, for example, now look at this statement. I was going to reiterate this statement. All UBOs are natural person, but not all natural person are UBO. Does that make sense to you?
Yes.
Yes, it's only an
Does
individual
that
that has
statement,
25%.
sorry, say that again?
It's only the individual that has 25% of the company that can become a UBA.
Absolutely. So you must understand this statement because it's really important. It might confuse you moving forward if you don't understand the statement. What this statement means is if you are a natural person and you own 25%, then you qualify to be called the UBO. But if you're a natural person and you don't own 25% or more, then you're just a natural person. That's what it means. So literally, it means all UBOs are natural person, but not all natural person are UBO, because for you to qualify to become a UBO, you must own 25%. For example, we have an entity, a natural person owns 26%, regarded as a UBO. If this individual owns 24%, is it 14%? Is he a UBO or not?
No, it's not.
It's not.
No, it's not. It just remains a natural person. Now, if this individual owns 20%, it's not a UBO, but it's still a natural person. Yeah. Now let's go back to this calculation. Now we have our entity. Company A is worth $100. Then we have company B who owns all of company A, which is $100. Now, natural person owns all of company B. The question is he a UBO or not?
He's a UBO.
He is or he is not?
He is.
It is.
Why?
Well,
Owes more than 25% or more.
How many percentage does he own?
100%.
Absolutely. Yes, he is a UBO. He owns 100% of company A indirectly. Now, he doesn't own it directly, but he owns it through company B, right? Now, is he a UBO or not?
He is.
Yes, he is.
Why?
He owns
Because he is
50%.
50%.
Are you sure he owns 50% of company A?
Oh, you know, he owns no, he owns 25% of company.
Are you sure he's
No,
25%?
he owns
No,
50%
he
of
owns
company
all of
A.
yeah, he's 50%. He owns of company A, yeah. Because he owns all of company B, so he owns 50% of company A. The UBO.
Are
Don't
you
confuse
sure?
me. Yeah, don't confuse me.
Is it 50% or 25%?
That's why I need you guys to confirm for me.
Because if he owns half of company A, is just 50% of the company. And the natural
Yes.
person is owing half of company A. So he's owing 25% of the
No. He
I
owns
don't
all
know.
of
No,
he owns
he
all
owns
of 50% because he
He
owns
owns all
all
of
of it 50%.
yeah. So he owns all of company B, and company B owns
Okay.
half of company A. So he owns 50% of company A.
Yeah.
Does everyone agree? Who disagrees?
I don't know, somehow, yeah.
But he owns
50%.
25% actually, not a 50%. Now let's think
Not 50.
about it. No, it's not. So let's think about it. Is it 50 or 25?
25.
25%.
Why is it 25?
Why is it 25?
It is 25 because company A is $100 and
Uh-huh.
company B owns only 50% of the $100, which is $50. Then the individual is now owing 50% of company A, which is 25%.
No,
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 he
if the
owns
correct
all
answer
of
is on the
company
screen.
B.
He owns all of company B.
Yeah, so it's 50%. I was just messing with you.
That's
All of
I've been laughing here.
it is 50% now. I agree. It's 50%. All right.
Yeah, does everyone agree now? Because I just want you to be sure that you understand what you're saying. Yeah? Okay. So company A is $100. Now company B says, oh, I own $50 out of company A, which is 50% of it. Now natural person is owning all of that $50, which is the 50%, which makes him a UBO because he owns 50% of company A indirectly through company B. Yeah. Don't mind me, sometimes I do that just to be sure that we're all on the same page. Now, is he a UBO?
Yes, he is.
Why?
Because he
Because
owns
he owns 25% of company A via company B.
Absolutely. So he owns 25% of company A indirectly. What about this guy? Is he a UBO?
No, he's not.
Why?
Because he only owns 17.5% of company A.
No, he owns 35% of company A.
35%. 35% is he owns 35% of company B.
UBO or not?
It's 17.5% of
No,
company.
no,
No,
it's
$70.5.
Yeah, but if you do the percentage, it's 17.5% of company A, so he's not a UBO.
So what are we
He's not-
going with? What are we going with? I need to go with
he's not a UBO.
He's
not a UBO.
he's not a UBO. He's still
Doesn't know.
17.5%.
He's a UBO.
He's a UBO. He has 35% of
I
company
think
B.
it's a UBO. I think so.
Yeah,
He's
he's
a
a UBO.
That's to them.
He owns more than 25% of company B.
So
Also,
the guys that saying it's a UBO, if he's a UBO, that means he must own more 25% or more of company A, is what you're saying.
Yeah.
Is that what you're saying? But you guys that think it's a UBO?
Yeah, he owns 32.5. That's $32.50 of the
32.
Yeah.
No.
He owns 35% of company B.
So let me break
No
it down.
matter how
Let me
much
break
the
it down.
company costs.
Company A says I am $100. Company
Yeah.
B says I own 50% of you, which is $50.
Sorry guys, I miss like 10 minutes, 15 minutes of this. Sorry.
Yeah, that's fine. So who are we going with? Are we saying it's a UBO or are we saying it's not? Because someone is bringing in a different mix into it to say
No,
32.
he's not. He's not.
He's obviously a UBO.
He's not a UBO.
He's not a UBO.
So if it's obviously, then how?
Sorry, I don't understand. Natural person owns 35% of the company B. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Yeah.
He owns
Okay, no,
35%
he's
of
not
company.
he's not a UBO then.
He's not a UBO. He's not a UBO.
Okay, he's obviously not a UBO now, right? That's what we're going with.
Correct. Yeah, it's only 17.5%.
He's not.
Could you explain further? Because my understanding is that company B owns 50% of company A.
Yeah.
And out of that 50% they own, the natural person controls 35.
Yes.
So is it not above 25%? It has a control of
So 35% of 50% is what?
So
35 or 50.
35 or 50. Okay, I get it now. Thanks.
Yeah, good man. Good man. That's where we want everyone to get to. So who does not understand it? Because when we get into the details, then you would need this understanding to do the structure and be able to drill down in the real life
Yeah.
case.
Yeah, I don't get it.
You don't get it, right? So
Yeah.
let me explain this. Now company A is $100. That's why I said think about it in terms of dollars, right? Now company B is saying, I own 50% of company A. Now 50% of $100 is what? Yeah. If you have $100
Yeah.
and I ask you, give me 50% of it, how much would you
Yeah.
give me?
Yeah, $50.
$50.
50, which means company B is only controlling half of company A. They own half of company A. They don't own 100 of company A. Now, company natural person then controls 35% of that 50%. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, it does.
Not 35% of 100%. 35% of that $50 is what they're controlling. Does that make sense? Now, if you calculate it, if you have $50 and I say out of that $50, now I want to buy 35% of it, how much would how much would I own from that $50?
$0.5.
Exactly. It should be 17.5. Remember, that $50 is coming from company A. That $50 is sitting with company B. Now, it literally means that I control company A indirectly because I own 17.5. So as long as I'm owing $17.5 out of the $100 that is sitting with company A, I don't have $25. But before you call me a UBO, I must own $25 or more. But in this instance, I only own $17.5. So I am not a UBO. Does that make any sense?
But company A is UBO.
So a UBO is a natural person. So let's go back and reiterate that, right? So we mentioned that, bear with me. Sorry, I'm just trying to bring that out. So when we define a UBO, right? A UBO is a natural person, always a natural person. Point number 2, a UBO is always a natural person, not a legal entity. A legal entity that is in between a customer, they're known as the IBO. IBO is a link between a customer and the UBO. Does that make any sense? That's why we said all natural person are UBO, but not all UBO.
IPO.
Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Shall we progress? Or I'm happy to rate that again in a different way.
So in this case, we don't have a UBO, but an IBO.
Yes. But an IBO doesn't have any criteria, as long as the only criteria is they have to just be a link.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make any sense?
Yeah.
So in this case, on this structure, there is no UBO, but we don't know where the UBO is. Yeah. Now let's move forward now. I'm sure you understand it as we go forward. You understand it better because I think you're getting there. Now, he's not a UBO because he owns less than 25% of company A indirectly. Why? Because he owns 17.5%. Now, if company B owns 10% of company A, right? So bear with me. I keep making this mistake all over again. Apologies. Yeah. So if company B owns 10% of company A, that literally means that it owns $10 of company A.
Dollars.
That making sense, right? Now, natural person owns 25% of company B, which is 25% of $10 is $2.50. Yeah. Now, is he a UBO? Clearly not, because he owns less than. Yeah, does that make sense? Now, let's go for that because I'm going to provide much more detail into it now. Now, a natural person that meets the threshold of 25% will be regarded as a UBO. And there are some entity or structure of some companies, by their nature, they conceal the ownership identity of a UBO. It makes it difficult for us to identify those UBOs. It's very important in KYC that anytime you're dealing with a corporate entity, you must identify a UBO or a reason why you do not need to identify that UBO. And I'm giving you in the 6 rules. One of the reasons why you might not be able to identify a UBO is it is mathematically impossible for anyone to own 25%. For example, if 5 people own $20 or 20% of an entity, no one is a UBO, correct? However, I will come to that then we identify a PSC, a significant controller, but no one is a UBO. Or if the entity is owned by a government, you know, majority of the shares is owned by a government, say 80%, it means that there is no UBO. Or if it's listed on the London Stock Exchange or recognized stock exchange or New York Stock Exchange, then we know there is no UBO, right? Now, this type of entity that conceal the identity of ownership are called a high-risk entity. They range from shell companies to shelf companies to private investment companies to offshore companies to charity organization. Bearer shares is also an instrument that conceal the identity of beneficiary owners and nominee shareholders. So I'm going to play 1 or 2 videos for you to understand each of this. Now let's talk about shell companies, right? So what are shell companies? Just sit back and just enjoy this short clip, and then I'll take it from there. Another type of entity that kind of conceal the ownership structure or the ownership identity of the identity of an ownership or beneficiary owner is a trust. Trust is another perceived high risk company or high risk entity. Why? Let me explain. What is a trust? A trust will typically be an entity that is used to secure assets in a way. Now, for whenever a trust is created, there's usually a grantor. Who are grantors? Grantors are individuals who transfer assets into a trust. They are the ones that transfer assets. It could be an individual, it could be a couple, right? It could be a group of people, right? They are the one that put the asset into a trust. So creating an entity, then you move in money, you move in a property, you move in whatever to say this trust then owns this money or this trust owns this property. Now, once they move those assets into the trust fund, right, they appoint individuals known as trustees. Now, these trustees legally are known as the legal owners. They manage the trust for the benefit of the UBO. Now, the UBO can range from a little baby to an adult to a group of people who are the beneficiary of the trust, but this trust is managed by trustees. Now, the issue here is this individual who benefits or they receive the distribution from the trust. Their identity could be hidden depending on the jurisdiction in which the trust is being created. And that kind of creates a heightened risk of AML, right? It creates an anti-money laundering risk. It heightens the risk because we might not know who's behind it. So in cases like this, where the law in the land does not allow us to know who benefits from the trust, but the money laundering regulation says every beneficiary must be identified. So because the law says the trustees are the legal owners because they manage the trust, they make the decision on behalf of the UBO, whether the trustees is one person or 2 or 10, you will identify and verify all trustees and treat them like the UBO. Only where there is a reason that the individual who benefits from the trust is not legally allowed to be known. There are good reasons why you might not, a jurisdiction might issue that or courts might issue that, it is, or there might be a law surrounding why an individual might not be recognized, it should not be identified. One could mean that the life of the individual benefit is in danger. It could be from a royal family which they don't want to expose any, or anything like that. There's a lot of, legal reasons and rational reasons, but criminals explore the vulnerability of this type of entity and use it for the purpose of money laundering. Yeah. Another one is nominee shareholders. Nominee shareholders is liken it to, we have the original UBO, right? The UBO then appoint a representative signing a shareholder. So they're called a nominee shareholder. They act on behalf of the UBO. The nominee shareholder appears on all the share certificates and company's officials document and public record. Then the original UBO receives the income or dividend from the share ownership and also control the entity, right? And the AML risk lies in trying to understand who the real UBO is, because the obscuring of the individual makes it difficult. Yeah, and this is usually more around offshore companies as well. They use this nominee shareholder nonsense, or I call it nonsense because yes, it's shown me a lot of, you stressed me in a lot of review, AML review, where I need to try to identify that and later realize that is a nominee shareholder. I'm going to play a video which explains offshore company, and then you might have, an understanding of what I'm trying to explain. Yeah. Okay, sit back and enjoy.
Hello, this video explains how offshore companies provide anonymity security and ease of use. First of all, let's understand the situation. You are a businessman trying to simplify your daily business and decide to set up an offshore company in Gibraltar. But you don't wish to appear in the public registry. You want to be anonymous. But of course, you want to be the only one having access to your funds at the bank and have it legally done. We incorporate you, a company, in Gibraltar or anywhere in the world, and appoint a director acting as a nominee director. For holding the shares of your company, we will use a nominee shareholder. Now, once the company is incorporated, comes the time to open up a bank account. In order to consider the company fully and only yours, while you will be opening the bank account, the nominee director will draft and sign a power of attorney, a declaration of trust, saying that you have full power to manage the company and that you are the owner of all of the shares. This document is requested by the bank, so they will consider that you are the client, but the nominee will have no access to the funds. Now ready to open a bank account and manage your company alone. You are the only contact person with your bank to talk about your money. Conclusion: you now own a company in Gibraltar, where your name does not appear on the registry, so that you are anonymous. On the other hand, you have in hand a power of attorney and a deed of trust, which are legal documents recognized by the bank, and which grants only you access to your funds and company. Enjoy doing business.
Yep. So there you have it, an example of an offshore company and how a nominee shareholder's been it's been exploited or could be exploited for illicit gain or for illegal use. Yeah. And now let's talk about group ownership. So group ownership is another area that kind of poses a
Sorry,
high.
pardon my interjection.
Yeah.
Yeah, so in cases where a nominee shareholder, nominee directors are used, how do you, I mean, if you're going to answer the question later on, then by all means, how do you manage those kind of situations when conducting your, say, for instance, transaction monitoring and subsequent, when subsequent trigger events occur and then you now need to do some kind of DD in the course of the operations of the account? How do you handle those situations where nominee shareholders and directors are used on the basis of transactions carried out by the ultimate beneficiary owner, to put it that way, considering the fact that the nominee shareholders have signed the declaration of trust and the power of attorney and whatnot, giving the ultimate beneficiary owner control of the account, which wasn't to the knowledge of the bank when the account was opened.
Okay, so now two questions, right? Or two answers. One, I'm going to assume that your question is, the first question is the bank is not aware that it's a nominee shareholders, and how do we become aware of it? Is your question correct?
Yes, yes.
So the way you become aware of it is, one, in the annual report, right? There's usually an indicator. Some jurisdictions, for example, the UK, the US, equivalent European countries, mandate that all nominee shareholders are declared. You must give an indicator that you're actually using a nominee shareholder, right? And then because that information, there's an indicator in one of the annual reports, then once you identify that, then you have to request for it. So then now they could potentially say they don't want to disclose it, but then have to provide you with a letter of Anthony that shows that, okay, they're not able to disclose it, and it has to have a legal backing, you know, that they would not be disclosing it. And the reason is because there's something called blocking regulation, right?
Yeah.
Part of money laundering regulation, in Europe and EU, you must declare the beneficiary owner. It is a must. You must know who the beneficiary owner is. But then someone is coming within that jurisdiction to say, oh yeah, we're not allowed. In that jurisdiction, you know, the certain jurisdiction would not allow that, you know, to use the nominee shareholders. And if you use it, you have to provide it to some institution. For example, financial institution is an exception that for you not to provide that information. There are some institutions, maybe you need it for registration. You might not want to be publicly available, and that's why we use GDPR law to say we'll protect your information. No one will know, you know, we'll guide it and all the basic stuff, right? But for the purpose of due diligence and compliance, we have to get that information. Now, there are some other jurisdictions like Gibraltar, you know, China Islands, that the law in the land does not allow you to provide that information. It gives you the liberty for you to use nominee shareholders without being questioned. A bank that adhered to the money laundering regulation would not onboard such customer. Does that make sense? If they become,
Yeah.
you have to onboard the customer. So when you identify stuff like that, then unfortunately, and that's why those countries are regarded, one of the reasons why those countries are regarded as high risk country, because they are offshore companies. The jurisdiction, they have weak AML framework in their country, and so that is the reason why it poses a heightened risk to countries like the UK, the US, that actually have a transparency in the ownership structure. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks.
You're welcome. So now let's go into group and family ownership. Now, group and family ownership also poses some sort of risk to some sort of heightened risk of AML, and I'll explain how. Now, sometimes that you could have a family, you know, on you know, a shareholder certificate that just says the company is owned by Baker's family, for example. Now, the AML risk lies because there's no such thing as verifying family. There's only verifying individual. So we can't verify a family. We need to know who in the family owns more than 25% or owns 25% or controls the entity, right? There must be some sort of distribution of shares or distribution of control, and that information needs to be understood. So, for example, so if we have an entity, I'm just going to, go through. I'm not going to explain in detail because we'll cover it in a minute. We have an entity such as this, and at the top of it is owned by Baker's family, and Baker's family indirectly, owns the entity 49.22%. Now, yes, we know that the family owns 49.2%, but we can't verify the family. In this case, bear in mind, you would have to request a breakdown or to identify the portion percentage by individual amongst the family, or you need a confirmation from a third party certification confirmation, for example, from the solicitor and accountant, confirming that no individual owns 25% or more of that entity. You need one of those. One is a breakdown, or two, an attestation from a independent third party confirming that no individual owns 25% or more. Does that make any sense? Because if they confirm that, it means that there's no UBO, so there's no need to bother anyone, basically, even if you don't want to release that information. Yeah. So that's the risk that it poses. So I'm just going to go for that. I'll come back to that. Now, in identifying a UBO, there are 4 stages in which we suggest that you apply when you want to conduct an ownership breakdown. One is to create an ownership chart, which is the first thing. And now a lot of people usually don't do this because they feel like they can just look at a chart and understand it. But I would advise that you create your own chart. The more you practice, the more you create your chart, the better you understand the ownership. Just looking at numbers sometimes can be confusing. Yeah, create an ownership structure chart. 2, apply accumulation methodology to identify the UBO, and I'll explain what that means. 3, identify all the IBOs within the ownership structure. I'm sure everyone understands who or what the IBO is. And lastly, identify and verify all UBOs identified. Yeah, I'm sure we understand what the point 1 means. It literally means draw the structure out based on the information you have. Accumulation methodology, I will explain. Identify all the IBOs because you have to carry out sanction screening on all the IBOs. And whenever you identify an individual who's a UBO, then you have to verify them by requesting for their passport or using whatever agreed process in the organization where you'll be working to verify those individuals. Yeah. Now let's look at UBO, applying accumulation methodology. This entity, client number one, company number one, is owned by these individuals and this entity. Now my question to you, please unmute yourself, is natural person a UBO or not? Now before I go into that, right, look at the top of the page. It says low and medium risk. Now remember, when we were doing the level of due diligence, we said SDD is low risk, CDD is medium risk, and EDD is high risk. Remember that. So whenever you see low and medium risk, is the baseline, which is 25%. Anything EDD, most organization, is regarded as 10%. So if we're dealing with high risk, a UBO would be recognized as anyone who owns 10% or more. But in a normal baseline, which I've explained, is 25% for low and medium risk, because that's the baseline. But wherever you see we specify that this is an EDD case, please understand that we're dealing with 10% threshold and not 25. Does that make any sense? I hope I didn't confuse anyone.
Yeah, it's good.
Okay. Okay. Now, natural person A is a UBO, right? Is natural person B a UBO?
No, in this
No.
case.
No, in this case. So what about company 2 and company 3? What do we do? Do we find out who owns them or not?
We drill down. We do.
Yeah, we find out who
Why
owns
do we
them.
do that?
Because we need to figure out who indirectly owns company 2 and what their percentage stake is.
Absolutely. The reason is because there is a potential risk that there might be one individual who owns the entire company 2, and that makes him a UBO. Or there could be 2, or there could be 3, where one person owns 25%, the rest of them share the remaining 5%. Or in company 3, it might be that one person just owns the entire company and it's 25%. But if we don't drill down, we don't know. Or it could also be that natural person B is actually sitting in one of those companies indirectly, own 10% outside here, then own another one. Then if you add it together, you might own that percentage, which means the threshold of 25%. So let's do a bit of drill down. By looking at it, it says natural person B owns 50%, natural person C owns 50%, natural person E owns 30%, and natural person D owns 70%. Now my question to you is, how many dollars or how much does natural person B own?
25%.
And
Does anyone agree?
15.
Yeah, I agree with it.
Yeah, I agree with him. He has 25%.
Why?
He has
Because-
10% already, and then he on his own, and then he has 50% of 30% of company 2. That is 10 plus 15%. That's 25.
Mhm.
Does everyone not understand how we've derived that?
Yeah, myself.
Sorry?
Myself.
You don't understand. So let me explain. So this entity, is $100, right? Because remember, the rule is always assume they're worth $100. Natural person B owns 10% of the $100. How much does he own? Yeah. If natural person B owns 10% of the $100, how much does it? Excuse me. How much does he own?
Is it 50, right?
So this is $100. Client's company 1 says I own $100. The natural person B says I now own 10% of that $100. If you have $100 and I say give me 10%, how much will you give me?
It should be is it
Anyone?
50, right?
$10.
$10.
But in a way, it would be $10 if you think about it. Now, if you have $100
Okay.
and I said, oh, you have £100, and we're like, all right, please, we need to share this money. And you said, oh, I'm going to give you 10% of my $100. Then it means that you're giving me $10 out of the $100, right? And the moment you give me $10, it means that this guy literally has $10 out of the $100. Now, because he owns $10, remember we said only individual owns $25 will be regarded as UBO. Now you already have $10, not $25, so it's no UBO. Now when we drill further, we realize that natural person B is also existing within the structure. He owns 50% of the $30 because this guy owns 30% of the $100, which means he owns $30, right? If you put $30 in bracket here, this guy owns 50% of the $30. Now, if you have $30 or 30 pounds, and I said, I own 50% of the $30 of the 30 pounds, how much will you give me? 50% of $30 or 30 pounds is 50.
15.
Correct. Now, because he owns 15, and that's where the accumulation come into play, you accumulate what he owns indirectly here, and the $10 he owns here and the $15, when you add it together, it makes him own $25 and already meet the threshold. He's a UBO.
Okay. Okay.
Now, if you look at this guy,
okay.
this guy owns natural person C, he owns $15. It doesn't meet 25. Is he anywhere else? No. This guy owns 30%. So, you know, as long as one person is not owning all of this, it means that these two did not meet the threshold. Does that make any sense? Logically. Yeah.
So company 3 owes 25%.
Yeah, so company 3 owns 25% of this, which is owing $25. But then this guy already owns 30%, this guy already owns 70%. But for us to make any individual a UBO, they must own $25, you know.
Okay. So you look at the intersections to do the calculations.
Yes.
Okay.
So sorry, sorry to digress a bit. Can I go ahead? Okay, so is there any personal significant control here now? If you were to identify persons of significant control, could we say company natural person D is or natural person C is?
So no. So in this case, we're only identifying a UBO. I'll come to the PSC, which is person of significant control. I'll come to that part in a bit.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, I will definitely come there. Okay. So let's move forward. Now, now this is high risk. Now, when we say high risk, how many percentage are we looking at, or how many percentage would make an individual be a UBO?
10%.
10, absolutely. So bear in mind that we're looking for individual who owns 10%, not 25, because we're dealing with high risk. Now, if you look at the structure here, who is a UBO? And bear in mind, a UBO is only a natural person that owns 10% or more for high risk.
Natural person.
Natural person A.
Yeah.
We have to dig into the companies to get the total picture.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So because we already know where 48% is sitting with natural person A, there is another 52% that is floating somewhere, and 30 is owned by company 2, 15 is owned by company 3, and 7 is owned by natural person B. So natural person B owns 7%. So it's no UBO as of we know. Then we drill further and we realize that natural person C owns 15% of owns 50% of company 2, which makes it 15%, $15 or 15%, however you want to call it, similar to natural person D. And natural person B owns 30%, natural person F owns 19%, and natural person E owns 51%. Now, if you scan through the room, who do you think is a UBO aside natural person A?
B, C, D.
Sorry?
B, C, D.
Does everyone agree? And why?
Because CD owns 15% each of company B. And since we're dealing with high risk, we're looking out for 10%. So C and D has passed that threshold of 10%. Again, then B owns 7% directly, 7% directly, and then on company 3 he owns 30% of 15%, which is about
7.5.
Is it 7.5? So if you add it to 7, it's about 11 thereabout. Yeah. So that makes him a UBO.
I know for some of you, it might be a little bit confusing at the moment, and that's why we've got the recording, but I can assure you that the other slide is going to make it much more easier. So we've kind of broken it down much more better, but I'm going to move on from this. Like she just explained, it's very straightforward, but I'm going to use another view to explain this, right? So let me explain it this way. Yeah. Similarly, we're dealing with CDD here, which is 25%. We say we have our customer at the bottom. Now, our customer is owned by entity A 80% and owned by Mr. or Mrs. Shah 20%. Now, remember, no one can own an individual. So the drill that on the entity A, Khan owns 90%, Shah owns 10%. From this explanation, can anyone tell me who the UBO is and what percentage they own?
Shah and Khan are the UBOs.
Since we're not dealing with EDD, we're just dealing with CDD, it will be Khan.
Go on.
It will be Khan because Khan owns 25%, above 25%.
So if you say he owns above 25%, I need the exact figure.
He owns 90%.
He can't own 90% because entity A owns 80%.
Oh, he owns 90 of 80, which is
72%.
And what about Shah?
He owns
Shah,
10 of 80, which is not up to 25.
It's 20.
He owns 20%.
Shah owns 28%.
Is he up to?
Yeah, because he already owns 20% on his own and then owns 10% in the entity A as well. So if you add everything up.
Yeah. So 72 for Khan, then that 10% become, there's 8%. If you add that 8% to the 20, it'll be 28%.
Yeah, I see.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, 72, 80, 28.
For the rest of the guys, right? So we have our entity, right? Now, our entity is owned by Shah, 20%, right? 20% is not up to the 25%, which doesn't make him a UBO. However, we then own entity A that owns 80% of the $100. Now, 80% of $100 is $80. Now, Khan owns 90% of that $80, which is $72. Shah then owns 10% of that $80, right, which is $8, right? Now, Khan owns 72, which makes him automatically a UBO. Shah owns 8% at the top and 20%. If you add it together, he owns 28%, which makes him meet the threshold. So that makes a UBO. Now, there's something I just want to point out here. It means that the $100 is clear. Why? Because if you add 72 plus 80, it makes you 80, and this is 100. This is 80 plus 100, it shows you 100. So at every point in time within your structure, you must know where your $100 is sitting. Yeah, it just makes you understand that nothing is missing. Similarly, can we try this one out? Now, there are two questions. Who will be classed as a UBO and who may require further consideration for due diligence? Let's attempt this one, please.
20%, 25%.
Is it Smith?
Yeah, correct. If you say Smith, how many percentage is it on?
At 7.5% by Smith.
7.5, did you say?
37.5.
Okay.
That's Smith.
I'd say Parker as well.
And Parker owns how much?
Oh no, sorry, not Parker. No, not Parker. Sorry, I'd say Evans, but Evans, you just keep an eye on him because he's quite close to the threshold.
Does everyone agree? But I need the breakdown for everything. So Smith owns.
So from Evans owns 24%.
Yeah.
So because he's close. Say again.
Let's take it one after the other, just so everyone follows. I just want to make sure everyone is, we're carrying everyone along. How many percentage does Smith own? How many dollars? How much does Smith own?
$37.50.
How did you divide by that?
I think I just multiplied 0.75 multiplied by 0.5, and that gives you a 7.5%.
So he owns 75% of entity A, which is 50% of the client. So 75% of 50 is 35 point, which means he owns 35%, 35 point,
It's 7.5.
that's $7.5 dollars of client A.
Yeah. What about Jones?
Sorry, client. So Jones owns 25% of 50 of entity A. So it's basically, I think that should be about 9 point something.
12.5.
Jones 12.5.
Absolutely. What about entity C?
STC is not a human.
Yeah, but how much breakdown does he own?
30%. 30%.
Absolutely.
And
What
Parker
about
owns 20%.
20%? Now let's go to Evans. How much does Evans own?
24%.
24%.
Because it's 80% of the 30. So that's 24%. And Taylor owns how much?
3%. No, that will leave 6.
6, absolutely. So now let me give you an illustration. And again, I don't expect everyone to get on the same page. That's why there's recording. That's why you can attend as many times as possible. Training makes, practice makes perfect. I didn't understand that the first time I started reviewing this. It takes time, right? Some of the guys actually, for some of the guys, speaking on the call, have attended the session probably once, or they've watched complimentary videos. So don't feel like, because they're speaking, then they are more smart or intelligent. It's because they've watched it over, they've practiced, and then it makes them actually speak faster. Yeah. So don't feel that you don't understand it. All I'm going to ask you is please dedicate your time, watch the video as many times as possible, and you actually get some understanding. Okay. Okie dokie. Now, the breakdown here means that who is the UBO?
Just Smith.
Smith, absolutely. Why? Because he's the only one that has met the threshold. So we're answering the question. The question number 1 is who will be classed as an UBO? Now Smith, and who may require further consideration for due diligence, which means who is very close to the threshold, and that's
Evans.
So now that everyone kind of have an understanding of how we can drill down, I'm going to give you a structure, and I'm going to ask everyone to attempt this. So this is high risk, 10%. So please take your time. I'm going to give you guys 10 minutes before we get into the next topic, and then I will come back and we can discuss. Yeah. So attempt this. Let me know when I get back who the UBO is, and we'll talk about the breakdown. So we're not just going to say, oh, this is a UBO, that's a UBO. If you say someone is a UBO, you explain how you got it. So I'm going to come back in, what's the time now? In another 10 minutes. So I come back at 9:02.